Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Ray McGovern, and we've got Aaron Matei coming in. When we got about 20 minutes or a little less before he's going to make it, so he'll be on with Ray and I. We're talking Russiagate. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Ray McGovern. And if you want to find out everything that's happening with Ray, he writes a lot of good stuff. He does a lot of good work. So go to his website. Follow him, certainly follow him on X, but go to his website, raymcgovern.com, for all of the updated, his latest articles, all that kind of stuff. Now, Ray, Russiagate, it has, normally I'd say has raised its ugly head again, but it's something far different now. Those of us who were onto this thing a long time ago, from the very beginning, who were always skeptical and said it makes no sense, particularly the people it was coming from, are now looking at a number of things. And we're seeing Tulsi Gabbard it has been releasing things, and Chuck Grassley's office released an annex to the John Durham investigation. Now, I had said all along the Durham investigation was a cover-up. I felt like the whole thing was a cover-up, but we're seeing some extra stuff that they had. And it looks like maybe perhaps some of these people, the Brennans and Clappers of the world, might need to start luring up, shall we say. So let's talk about the things that you found that you thought were of particular note. I know you you got another article coming, but some of what you consider the biggies in this new latest drop of information.
Well, there's so many things, Garland. Let me take a look at the draft that I've been published now on consortiumnews.com. And the findings are really quite amazing because all you have to do is kind of read them and repeat them.
Let me read one from your article. Let me read one for you right now.
Okay, sure.
And this is from the appendix. During the first stage of the campaign, due to lack of evidence, it was decided to disseminate the necessary information through the FBI-affiliated technical structures, in particular, the Crowdstrike and Threat Connect companies, from where the information would be disseminated through leading U.S. publications. Now, this is the Clinton campaign saying we'll get these accusations against Trump out through Crowdstrike and through FBI affiliated. And in fact, at one point they said, we'll get this going, and then the FBI will throw oil on the fire later, almost as if they're working with the FBI, right?
Well, the FBI was pretty much the prime mover together with John Brennan behind this whole thing. One asks, how they possibly thought they'd get away with it. And that was easy. I mean, even James Comey had somebody help him write a book, right? About a year later. And in the book, he said, quote, I was operating in an environment in which Mrs. Clinton was sure to be the next president of the United States, period, end quote. So if you're operating in that kind of environment, I mean, you can take all kinds of liberties with the law and the Constitution if you're the kind of guy that Comey and Brennan were. And, hey, who's going to wonder? You probably get promoted. You might become Attorney General when she comes into her rightful place on the throne, right? You're not going to be indicted. You're not going to be investigated because she's sure to win. Uh-oh. Not only they were sloppy about a lot of things, but the latest, of course, just 2 days ago, is that the New York Post had a piece saying, whoa, when Kash Patel came in. Now, Kash Patel, for your audience, he's the new head of the FBI, but he was deep into investigating on behalf of Devin Nunes, the head of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, what was going on here. And he came to these conclusions, and it was never published until now, right? So he knew where all the bodies were buried and where the still live bodies roam around free. Well, it turns out that they didn't hide their tracks very well. Uh, they filled a whole bunch of burn bags. Now, I should explain to your audience, Garland, a burn bag, you know it well. Usually pretty big bag, like a shopping bag from Fresh Foods or Whole Foods or whatever, but it's twice the size, and it's paper, but you throw stuff in there when you're finished reading it, stuff that's classified. They call it burn bag because after it's kind of full, you staple it together, and then you throw it down this chute where it gets burned, pulverized, whatever they do to it, to make it non-readable. Now, these guys filled up all these burn bags in this secret room that they were working in. And then when they had to take a powder, had to go on the lam, they forgot about the burn bags. And so nobody could come in and take the burn bags and throw them down the chute to get them burned. And so they were. So Cash happened upon these things, opened them up, and said, "Oh my God, I don't need my own testimony now. Here it all is." And indeed, included in that bunch of documents was this so-called appendix to John Durham's tepid, his kind of weak, his anodyne version of his investigation. Now, John Durham, a great reputation, right? He spent 4 years doing this, right? Oh, 4 years. And he came up with, as you said, Garland, the same kind of whitewash for which he is pretty well known. What he did was he classified this appendix, and all of a sudden this appendix burst. Now, you know what happens when an appendix bursts, right? It's awful, it's terrible, and it's hard to clean up. And so what Senator Chuck Grassley finally understanding what an oversight chairman is supposed to be. It's supposed to be oversight, not supposed to be overlooked, And finally, at the request, he says, of the FBI and the CIA, he had that appendix sanitized. It's very damning. You read one thing, that was what leapt out of the key findings. I found this little draft that I did that's published now on consortiumnews.com and on my website. I might add, I never do, but my son who runs my website says, "You really ought to, Dad." He spent a week making it really easily searchable.
Okay.
So it goes back, 17 years or so now. And you can search on things, and I use it myself for when I can't find something, and I can't find something that I publish, it's always on my website. So here's one thing that was really interesting. I almost tried to get in touch with Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken because I felt really bad that I blamed them for thinking up this genius idea of blaming the Russians for hacking the DNC. I mean, it would be just the kind of thing they would have thought up. But no, it was a woman staffer on Hillary Clinton's staff, and she said, "I know what we'll do, Hillary. We'll blame it on. We'll try to the Russians here, and that way we'll get a twofer. We hate WikiLeaks and we hate Trump. So this is great." So, according to data from a Russian entity, this is interesting. The reason we have a lot of this data is because the Soros Foundation had people who were communicating with people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other people on the DNC, and not knowing that the Russians or anybody with any skills could hack their communications, the DNC and the Open Society people were communicating freely. Okay, so here's one of the things that comes out of this from the headquarters of Hillary Clinton. She approved the plan that was devised by her policy advisor, Juliana Smith, to smear Donald Trump by magnifying the scandal tied to the intrusion by Russian secret services. We know the intrusion didn't happen, right? Okay. In the pre-election process to benefit the Republican candidate. Okay. Now, this person, Juliana Smith, who is she? Well, I looked her up, and she's Ambassador Juliana Smith. Now, Biden named her U.S. Ambassador to NATO. So, properly addressed, she's ambassador. And this goes on to say, quote, in this write-up, as envisioned by Smith, raising the theme of Putin's support for Trump to the level of an Olympic-type scandal that would divert the constituents' attention from the investigation of Clinton's compromised electronic correspondence. Whoa, there's another twofer, you know? You play this thing up, and then people don't focus on what Hillary did. There are a couple other gems. Before Aaron comes on, he knows all this. Here's one. Barack Obama sanctioned the use of all administrative levers to remove possibly negative effects of the FBI investigation of cases related to the Clinton Foundation and the email correspondence of the State Department. And we all know how Hillary abused the emails in the State Department, putting top secret stuff on her server. Here's another one. Oh, this is good. Based on information from Wasserman Schultz, the FBI does not possess any direct kind of evidence against Clinton, quote, because of their timely decision about the email services. The email servers, their timely decision. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we know what that means. So, another one. The political director of Hillary Clinton's staff, a woman by the name of Amanda Renciera, regularly receives information from Attorney General Loretta Lynch on the plans and the intentions of the FBI. Oh, isn't that a nice, cozy thing? So the head of the Justice Department is in touch with the head of Clinton campaign, and she tells him what the FBI is up to and what they're going to do next, and all the plans and the intentions of the FBI. So,
and let me add something to that.
Yeah.
You remember the Phoenix infamous tarmac conversation between Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton? And we were told they were talking about their grandchildren.
Yeah, right.
And furthermore, I read further also in the annex report, and what I found interesting was some investigators went to Loretta Lynch, and they brought it to her attention that there was an email that said that she was advising the Clinton camp of the FBI investigation. And they said her response was odd.
Oh, was it odd?
Yes, they said her response was odd. She seemed unconcerned. She didn't want to look. She didn't give much of a response at all. Imagine that. Now, if it were me and someone said, Garland, you were doing something that clearly was a felony and would get you in jail, I'd say, time out. I didn't do that. I want you to know right now, people can look into it. They can do whatever they want to. Yeah. I didn't do it. I wouldn't go, okay.
Yeah, but Loretta was sure that Hillary Clinton was going to win, right? It's the same old story. These people really took incredible liberties with the law and the Constitution, and now it's all coming out. Now, Chuck Grassley has sort of grown some, as we used to say in the Bronx, right? He used to be very timid and kind of reluctant to get into any real investigation. Matter of fact, he bemoaned. I remember this. This was 2021. Remember that FBI lawyer that falsified the FISA application? It's a felony, right?
Falsified Kevin Kleinsmith?
Yeah. Oh, you got the name. Yeah. He was charged and convicted, and no jail time. His wife was pregnant or something, and so no jail time.
He didn't get disbarred?
Yeah, kept everything. So here's Chuck Grassley, head of the Oversight Committee, writing a tweet. And he says, oh my God, here we have a good example of the Department of Just Us. This is something that Bill Binney used to always say. It's the Department of Just Us, okay? And he says, look, you know, the FBI and the judiciary here are letting Kevin Kleinsmith off on a felony with no prison time. That's the Department of Just Us. Isn't that terrible? Well, yeah, it's terrible, but it's your job, Chuck Grassley, to ride herd on this kind of thing. Well, he grew a couple, as I should say. And this week, with Kash Patel and John Ratcliffe urging him on, he declassified this appendix, and this appendix burst, okay? And it burst just 2 days ago. I wrote about it last night. It's replete with the revelations that you wouldn't believe. Let me see if I can.
I got a good one right here to throw at you, Ray.
Sure.
Now, this came from one of the emails.
Mm-hmm.
According to the Durham, this memo stated in part that the Democratic Party's opposition is focused on discrediting Trump. Among other things, the Clinton staff, with support from special services, is preparing scandalous revelations of business relations between Trump and the Russian mafia. According to the Durham annex, based on analysis and translation of the intelligence, FBI analysts believe that at the time, the special services in the March 26th memorandum could refer to the FBI and the CIA, or more broadly, to the intelligence and law enforcement communities in the United States. Or it could refer to Trump dossier author Christopher Steele. So the Clinton staff, along with special services, which we already knew, the Clinton staff was working with the intelligence community on this. It's obvious they all work together, right?
Well, that's clear. Now, the wider implications of this, Garland, are really quite immense. This is the first time, and I've been around for a while, that anyone has had the guts to take on the deep state, the media, and the opposition party. Okay. Tulsi Gabbard has done that. She's thrown down the gauntlet before the deep state. No one does that. Okay. Now, to add another metaphor for gauntlet, now she's got to run the gauntlet between all these big, heavy players, okay, who have a lot of concern of what's going to happen to them, okay? Obama, okay? James Brennan, James Comey, John Brennan, and that fellow Clapper, Jim Clapper. Now, they have a lot to hide, but they never thought they'd have to. As a matter of fact, you know, I could say a couple words about Clapper because in one of my last appearances in Washington, I went to the Carnegie Foundation when I heard he was hawking his book about his experience in the intelligence community. And so I did what I often did back in the day, Garland. I got there a half hour early, bought the book, $27 it cost me. Anyhow, I shelled it out for the greater cause, right? I went into the men's room and I closed the door and I look at the index and what is he going to say about Iraq? Now, why does that matter? Because James Clapper was responsible for imagery analysis from all those satellites, whether it's video, whether it's still, whether it's multispectral or radar or infrared. I mean, he was responsible. He was running the outfit that used to belong to the CIA, okay, for objective analysis with people who have been at it since the U-2 business, but now belongs to the Defense Department. So he's appointed by Rumsfeld, and I'm sure Bobby Gates, who was a good friend of his, to run the imagery analysis. Now, when I turned to this page, here he makes this confession. He says, well, we didn't find any weapons of mass destruction, but we were under great pressure. Vice President Cheney was very, very interested in suspect sites, and so we identified 100 of them or so, and we looked at them really carefully. But I take my measure of responsibility, together with other intelligence professionals, for quote finding things that weren't actually there, end quote. Oh, wow! He writes that in his book. He said that he found things that weren't really there. In other words, weapons of mass destruction. He was happy to bruit about and say, yeah, of course, there are all manner of weapons of mass destruction, but they weren't really there. Oh, 1 million people die in Iraq and nearby, but you do your job. You're told by Rumsfeld not to find anything, or to fight them if you can, or manufacture it. At one point, Clapper was asked about this when he was still in place, and they said, well, how come you didn't find them? He said, oh, I think they moved them to Syria. And even the gullible press said, what? They could do that without anybody know? Oh, Clapper said, well, maybe they didn't move them to Syria. I don't know, So anyhow, that's the kind of guy Clapper is. Besides, of course, he's famous for saying that I know about the Russians. I know what the Russians are capable of. I know that they're almost genetically inclined. They're almost genetically driven to do really bad things, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Well, he must have learned that from the Curtis LeMay School of Russian Intelligence at the Air Force. It was crazy. And yet, who picked these hand-picked analysts to work on these things showing that it was the Russian hack or the Russian were responsible? Well, with Clapper and, of course, Brennan. One other thing we learned from these releases is that, they said that it was the intelligence community. The name of this study, which was an embarrassment to the intelligence analysis profession, was intelligence community assessment. Only one word of that title is correct, and that's assessment. Assessment is where you don't have many facts, and you do what we used to call in Army intelligence a swag factor that stood for a scientific wild ass guess. Okay, so he's making all these crazy things, and now he's been exposed. And the reason is that he was able to pick together with Brennan the 5 people who wrote this community assessment, which they advertised as 17 agencies. Hillary Clinton went big with that. Then they got it down to 3, and then it was hand-picked analysts from the 3. But now we know, no, it was hand-picked analysts, but they were picked by John Brennan, and they were all working for Brennan. Now, no one needs to clarify the fact that when you handpick the analysts, you handpick the results of their analysis, right? So it was just, so now it's all out there in black and white, and you can, you have documents that emerged from this burn bag and from other sources, because Kesh Patel knows where the bodies and the documents now are hidden, even if they're in burn bags. Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Hey, Ray, how you doing?
Great. Well, I know you got a limited time. So we're going over some of the stuff. I'm going to throw something at one of the things that I find of consequential of the information that's come out from the unclassified Durham report, apparently this annex, and see what you think. What's interesting about this is all the discussion about foreign influence, how terrible. We can't have foreign influence, guys. The one thing you don't want is foreign influence, right?
Of course not.
As the unclassified Durham report noted, beginning in late 2014, the FBI learned from a well-placed confidential human source that a foreign government foreign government two, was planning to send an individual to contribute to Clinton's anticipated presidential campaign as a way to gain influence with Clinton, should she win the presidency. The Durham annex noted that non-U.S. person one was directly tasked by the leader of a foreign government with facilitating the plan, but indicated plans to travel to the U.S. Now, what we find out is the FBI field office sought an expedited FISA authorization to begin coverage of this individual. Okay, that sounds like it makes sense. Foreign government are going to be interfered. However, as known from the unclassified Durham report, the FISA application lingered because everyone was super more careful and scared with the big name Clinton involved. Ultimately, after 4 months, the FISA authority was authorized following a commitment that Clinton and others targeted by the foreign government would receive defensive briefings. So now you find out somebody from a foreign government is going to be working with the Clinton people, and they're like, hey, we got to figure out what's going on with this. But first, the FBI briefed the Clintons. Well, if they suspected something was going on with Trump, I would have thought they would have briefed Trump. It's obvious that something is amiss here. Your thoughts, Aaron?
I didn't read that part of the annex, so I can't really comment on it. The main point I make about the whole hysteria on foreign influence is that during these years of the height of Russiagate, the fear-mongering about alleged Russian hackers and Russian trolls brainwashing millions of Americans into not voting for Hillary and sowing chaos, basically causing the country to crumble from within, everybody accepted the foreign influence campaign that dwarfs everybody else combined, and that's Israel's. Israel spending tens of millions of dollars to buy off politicians, to undermine an elected president like Barack Obama when he tries to reach a nuclear deal with Iran. Netanyahu came over, gave a speech to Congress, basically defying Obama. So that is a foreign influence that was tolerated, including when the Trump campaign did it. When Obama was leaving office, the Trump transition team colluded with Israel to undermine a vote that Obama was not going to veto for once at the UN that was critical of Israel. That was the actual Trump collusion with a foreign power. But everybody ignored that because they were too busy fantasizing about collusion with Russia and fear-mongering about so-called Russian interference, and B, because there's a bipartisan consensus around that foreign influence from Israel. So that's the point I'll make there. As to the example you laid out there, I don't know what that even is about. I want to go back to the first thing you guys were discussing. I caught some of your discussion, the Leonard Bernardo emails and the emails from another Clinton campaign aide. Before I get into it, though, let me just say, because I'm here with Ray, I haven't spoken to Ray publicly for a while, at least about Russiagate. I want to just acknowledge, and I don't want to turn this into a mutual admiration session. So this is just going to go one way towards Ray because we have limited time. Ray deserves infinite credit for everything he's done on Russiagate. Way before I came along, Ray was there calling this out. Him and his group of VIPs were pointing out from the start the evidence was not there. This is, in 2016, in late 2016, when the Russiagate hysteria really started building up. And at that time, it's funny to look back on it now, but during those years, late 2016, early 2017, 2018, 2019, you just could not publicly question these Russian interference allegations. And if you did, you were canceled. And so many of the spaces that used to welcome Ray shut him out. I remember at the Nation magazine where I wrote, there was such huge backlash when there was one article published by Patrick Lawrence based on the research that VIPs did, showing that the alleged hack of the DNC was not a leak. It was not a hack. It was a leak. And there was a lot of name calling of Ray and his colleagues, and there was a lot of just canceling. And so the show where I used to work, Democracy Now!, I just checked, didn't have Ray on for 8 years. Ray was on in March 2014. And then you have Russiagate come, and then Ray doesn't get back on Democracy Now! Until November 2022. And that's just an example of how even progressive spaces, no one told anybody what to say. But because we have such a sophisticated propaganda system, everybody just intuited that if you challenge this Russian interference thing, then you're out of polite society. You're a so-called conspiracy theorist. And so Ray deserves all the credit in the world for bucking that, for standing up, for holding on to, the facts. And he's called them out consistently from the start. I remember, he just talked about James Clapper's hand-picked analysts for the John Brennan and James Clapper's hand-picked analysts for the intelligence community assessment. He was the first person to point that out back when it back when that admission was made. The rest of the media just simply ignored it because they wanted to be stenographers for Russiagate, including progressive media. So I just want to give Ray all the credit in the world. So many of the evidentiary gaps that he was pointing out are now being newly confirmed by what we've got. And to me, this latest release about these purported emails with someone from the Soros Foundation and the Clinton campaign, to me, actually, I don't actually take them on faith. I have actually some questions about them. I'm not sure if they're real or not. But the point I want to make is even if they're fake, it doesn't matter, because the plot that they lay out about the Clinton campaign working with the FBI to frame Trump as a Russian agent and to gin up false claims of Russian interference, that happened. So we don't need an admission on paper or like a confession in an email for us to corroborate that, because we know what happened. They did push the fake Steele dossier. They did push the conspiracy theory about Trump and Russia communicating through an Alpha Bank server, and they brought that to the FBI. They did push through CrowdStrike, the Clinton campaign contractor, the now debunked claim of Russian hacking of the DNC. So whether these emails are real or not, it doesn't really matter to me, because there was a Clinton campaign plot, and we don't need someone to confess in writing to understand that. And the reason why I'm skeptical is because if you read the Durham report, he says he doesn't know if the emails are genuine, if they're partially genuine, or if they're entirely fabricated. And he presents a mixed picture. He says that some analysts thought they were credible, but at the same time, Durham found that some emails contained fragments of other emails sent by other people, and and he found 2 copies of the same email, and one of them had a different sentence that was added. So it's confusing. And the conclusion of the New York Times, I'm afraid here, might be right. That actually, I think it's possible that some of this was fabricated. Now, at the same time, the reason why they could be legitimate is because this is exactly what happened next. After these emails were written, there was collusion with the FBI. But at the same time, this idea that this plan was approved by Hillary Clinton in July, if that's what these emails say, according to that Clinton campaign advisor, the woman who's credited with coming up with this, that doesn't track with the timeline, because Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS, they were hired back in April by Perkins Coie, Clinton's law firm. So this plan by Clinton, I doubt it would have been approved in July if already back in April they're hiring Christopher Steele. CrowdStrike, the firm that launched Russiagate publicly by accusing Russia of hacking the DNC, that happens back in June. So, and in early July, Victoria Nuland, who's then serving in the State Department, she authorizes an FBI agent to go and receive the Steele dossier. And then we're supposed to believe that had nothing to do with the FBI opening up its investigation a few weeks later. So that's why I'm just not convinced that these emails, or at least are entirely authentic. And it's possible here that there's some fabrication. And they claim they got these emails from Russia. How do we even know that? There are multiple levels here in which someone could be messing with us, whether it's Russia, I don't know, for whatever reason, or whether it's the people who passed over these emails. I'm not going to take these emails on faith. And to me, it just doesn't really matter whether they're true or not, because what we know is confirmed is there was everything that these emails would only further prove, which is that there was a Clinton campaign plot with the help of the FBI and the CIA to frame Trump. And the real revelations, the ones that stand out to me, are what came out from Tulsi Gabbard's office in one of the earliest releases, where she released the intelligence community assessment that we weren't allowed to see before Obama ordered a new one that was released in January that we got publicly. There was another one back in September, and that intelligence community assessment contained an admission that the FBI and the NSA were dissenting on the core allegation at the heart of Russiagate, which is that Russia hacked the DNC and gave the emails to WikiLeaks. And now we learn nearly 9 years later that, in fact, the FBI and the NSA, contrary to what we were told, that they had, quote, low confidence. And why did they have low confidence? It's because it says, quote, we lack sufficient technical details. And who was saying that? Who was saying that back in late 2016? Ray Mcgovern was saying that. The evidence was not there. So now we learn, nearly 9 years later, that the FBI and the NSA were secretly agreeing with Ray Mcgovern, and James Clapper and John Brennan suppressed that, and it's only come out now. And we also know that even after the election, the intelligence picture hadn't changed. At that point, the assessment had become most agencies only have moderate confidence that Russia was behind, was probably, that's another caveat, behind at least another caveat of the hack and leak. So basically, the intelligence picture hadn't changed from that low confidence assessment from the FBI and the NSA. And we also learn from those same documents that the FBI, to investigate the alleged hack, was relying on who? Crowdstrike, the firm hired by Hillary Clinton, which is also something that Ray and I have been flagging for a very, very long time. On the same day that the testimony from Sean Henry, the president of Crowdstrike, came out, both Ray and I immediately sounded the alarm at what it said, because what did Sean Henry of Crowdstrike admit? He admitted that we have no evidence that these alleged Russian hackers actually took anything from the DNC. Well, then how are you possibly accusing them of hacking anything? And that admission, as Ray has tirelessly pointed out, was made in December 2017. Ray can tell us the exact date. It was kept from the public as well for years until May 2020, more than a year after Mueller shut down his probe. So those, to me, are the two most significant revelations. And one more thing, someone might argue, okay, fine, that was the evidence that they had before the election. That's why they had low confidence, but maybe they got in more evidence after that. Well, what do we learn from the declassified House intelligence report that also was just released? That there was no new intelligence basically collected after the election. All the intelligence that went into the January 2017 intelligence community assessment, the one that we got publicly, all of it was collected before the election. The only new intelligence that came in, quoting the Hipsey report, was, quote, paltry. So the same intelligence that led the FBI and the NSA to privately say we have low confidence that Russia was behind the hack and leak, that was used for the same ICA that we got publicly that told us that Russia did it. So that is confirmation right there that James Clapper, John Brennan suppressed their own intelligence agencies and committed fraud. And all the people who said the exact same thing publicly, who were smeared as Russian apologists, Russian assets, Russian propagandists, blah, blah, blah. It turns out we were just agreeing with what the FBI and the NSA were saying privately.
Let me throw something at you, Ray, and let me throw something at you guys. It's for people that don't know in the chat. My background is I was a police officer, and I was the commander of the investigations division of the statewide. I taught this stuff. This is what I did, and I worked with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force for a year. I know these people. So if anybody tells you the FBI is stupid, they were ignorant, they made mistakes, they were some of the best educated, most knowledgeable people that I've ever worked with. I'm not saying they're good. I'm saying they're extremely competent. And so anything that you see in this investigation and you say, well, the FBI, they screwed that up, they're stupid, that's a lie. Those people are extremely competent. I know because I worked with them. Here's the thing that was interesting and that is very remarkable about the DNC servers. According to what we have learned, the FBI said we're counting on CrowdStrike. We're not going to take the servers ourselves. We're going to count on CrowdStrike. Now, we learned in the Roger Stone trial that CrowdStrike was supposed to deliver a final report to Comey with the forensic evidence. I'm going to give you a final report, and this was going to tell you how I found everything. Well, let me tell you this. As a guy who ran investigations, that wouldn't sink, because that would never go anyway. If I'm running the investigation, my people are going to do the forensic evidence. So it's absurd. But that being said, here's what we found out in the Roger Stone investigation. When they started looking at it, they said, oh, okay, well, CrowdStrike, they were supposed to deliver you a final report to say, here's the forensic evidence that we found on the servers. And they never delivered the report. There was never a final report.
They delivered 3 draft reports that CrowdStrike redacted themselves.
But never a final report.
Well, I mean, like final or draft, whatever. They gave them 3 reports. CrowdStrike redacted it themselves, which is just so unusual. So it's like, again, this, I've made this analogy often. This is like me accusing someone of breaking into my house and stealing stuff, me accusing them of that. And then when the police come, I say to the police, you can't come in here. Just rely on my own investigation, which I'm going to personally redact and then submit in draft form. I mean, and then, Durham found evidence over the course of his investigation, which he oddly never pursued. He didn't touch this CrowdStrike angle, even though he uncovered new evidence about what was going on, that the FBI was making repeated requests to CrowdStrike and Michael Sussman, Hillary Clinton's lawyer. Can we come and look at the servers ourselves? And CrowdStrike kept stalling and saying, no, like we're not ready to do that. And finally, CrowdStrike said, you know what? because we want to help our friends at the FBI, we're going to send you our imaging of the servers free of charge. You don't have to pay us. So the FBI never looked at the servers for itself, relied on Crowdstrike's forensics, and the reports were in draft redacted form. It's incredibly odd. And just to underscore this, no establishment media outlet has ever reported what Ray and I have tirelessly highlighted, which is that Crowdstrike's Sean Henry, a former colleague, by the way, of Robert Mueller and Jim Comey, admitted under oath that we have no concrete evidence of Russian hacking. And by the way, if you read the transcript, and I know Ray has talked about this a lot, that admission from Sean Henry, it comes after an intervention from his lawyers. Because if you look at the transcripts, Adam Schiff, exactly. It's Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff thinks he's got this, the star witness now who's going to reveal finally, he's going to show any doubters that the Russians hacked the DNC. So Adam Schiff says to Sean Henry, hey, so when was it when you found out that Russia hacked the DNC? And then the transcript reflects that Sean Henry's lawyers, which actually is the same lawyers for the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Perkins Coie.
Perkins Coie. They intervene and they tell him something. And then he says, my lawyers will remind me that actually we don't have any concrete evidence that Russia. It's unbelievable. And so my point is, no media outlet, and a lot of alternative media outlets have never reported this too. It's just unbelievable.
And here's the part about that, Ray, as a person who was an investigator, this is the critical part of it. If they had found someone, whoever, that had hacked into that and they wanted to prosecute them, right? The evidence was inadmissible in court. You got to have chain of command. You got to have all of that, right? So sure. I'm defending him. I say, my client is accused of hacking into this thing, right? Let me see the evidence. Well, we've got some partial reports from CrowdStrike, but we never actually got anything. I need a hearing with the judge. Throw all of this stuff. So if they'd have if it had been someone, if they'd have suddenly found out that Garland Nixon was the one that hacked into the server and they had everything they needed, none of that evidence would have been admissible, and they knew it. So it's not like they could. Anyway, Ray, your thoughts?
No, I just want to thank Aaron, but it wasn't just me. It was our whole group of veteran intelligence professionals for sanity. Particularly, we attract some really neat people, and 3 of these were very senior officials of the National Security Agency: Bill Binney, Ed Loomis, and Kurt Wiebe. And they came to us and said, look, can we help out? And we sure as hell can. How about looking at this charge about Russian hacking? And they issued, we put together a thing on the 12th of December, 2016, right? Even before Trump came into office, saying it couldn't have been what has been alleged here. It had to have been a copy off the computer onto a thumb drive. And that was borne out later. That's one thing. Now, Aaron asked about the date. The Sean Henry testimony was the 5th of December, 2017. Now, just at the end of that month, Congress changed, right? Okay. The Democrats lost control of the House Intelligence Committee. And who comes in but Adam Schiff? And what is the first thing he does? He says, give me that Sean Henry report. And say, okay, now you can leave. And he hides it somewhere, maybe in a burn bag, I don't know. But he hides it for 2.5 years. And then finally, with Trump in office the first time, and one of his advisors says, you're the president. You could probably tell Schiff, to shove it, or rather to... if he doesn't release that report, it's not classified, that you will. And so actually it was Ratcliffe, I think, that called up Schiff and said, hey, look, release that report tomorrow, or we're going to release it. Then we released it. And the date of that was May 7th, 2020. So 2.5 years, okay? Now, was that picked up by any media since then? Oh my God. So I think that points up the problem we all face. Now, is it any different? Can we break into the consciousness of more Americans? What do we need to do? even on this issue, and granted, the media has a lot else to cover, like Epstein and all that stuff. This issue has been avoided for the most part by the media. What the New York Times has done is publish an op-ed, a guest essay by James Clapper and John Brennan. My God, So how do we, this is important, and why it's important became clear to me when I kept getting badgered. You're a one-act pony there, Mcgovern. What's going on here? Why do you keep? And finally, I said to this one radio host, I said, "Look, I guess the answer to your question as to why I keep at this is because Russia has nuclear weapons, okay? And the US people are being brainwashed into thinking that Putin has two horns and that he's devil incarnate, and that the Russians, Biden or Trump could whip up enough support on false pretenses in the media to do a war or risk a war with Russia. That's why it's so important. And so what I'm saying here is that I'm really still angry that we have had no success. People like Jim Risen and others have vilified Bill Binney as a conspiracy theorist. People are paid to do this because they want their own. I mean, Bill told me, he called up Jim Risen and he said, "What's going on there?" Well, Jim says, "Well, I got this job and, they asked me to do this and. Now, Bill is a much more charitable guy than I am. But I would have reamed this guy out. These are the kinds of hacks in the New York Times and New York Times alumni that, reign supreme. Now, the other thing I'll just point out is when they hired Crowdstrike, and, some people make a distinction. It wasn't the FBI, it was the Democratic National Committee. Well, that's a distinction without a difference, right? Okay. So they hired Crowdstrike. Well, it was fresh off a really successful analysis having to do with the Russian hacking of Ukrainian artillery, right? Oops, except that after the report came out, the Ukrainians looked at this and 6 months later said, well, this isn't quite right. We confess it was a manufacturing error. So precisely at this time, these guys say, "Oh, let's hire Sean Henry, Crowdstrike, who we set up, our best friend forever, that is James Comey, and his predecessor Bob Mueller, and he'll do what we say." And of course, that's what he's done. I'm sorry to carry on that long, but it's sort of so smelly, and I don't see any way out. People are learning from this, and I think the alternative media is making strides. Aaron and I are both on the judges program, and God, now wherever I go, I people recognize me from that. So maybe I should not be so angry, but I still am.
Well,
Yeah.
listen, Russiagate's too big to fail because in this case, unlike Iraq WMDs, it wasn't just the corporate media that bought into this. It was a lot of alternative media too. And that's what I was trying to say before. Alternative media that should have had on Ray McGovern from the start, but didn't, and wouldn't even allow a dissenting opinion. And so it's too big to fail. And so people who bought into Russiagate and peddled it, basically what they'll do now is they'll say, "Okay, fine, yeah, but so long ago, who cares?" And that's so easy. That's what happens in these propaganda campaigns. At the time, it's all consuming. You cannot challenge the narrative. Those who don't want to be seen as Russia apologists or be called names or be left out of media circles, they go along with it. They drink the Kool-Aid, and then once the damage is done, they just move on and forget about it and move on to the next scam that they're going to parrot. But those of us who care about facts and care about a story like this, which still has consequences. Russiagate has had so many consequences geopolitically inside the U.S. I think it's deepened polarization. It's sort of deepened the this. There was a sort of a big elitist conceit behind it that Americans are so malleable and gullible that Russia can brainwash them into not voting for St. Hillary and instead voting for Trump, the wrong guy. So there wasn't a real sort of elitist contempt behind it, and that deepened polarization among many other consequences, including incentivizing Trump to be a hawk on Russia and taking steps that helped lead to the Ukraine war, and the climate overall of making diplomacy with Russia impossible. That there's a direct line between Russiagate and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. On the issue of CrowdStrike, Ray said it all, but there's one thing I want to mention. James Comey, when he went for Congress, he talked about, like he was asked, like, why didn't you investigate the DNC servers for yourself? He said, yeah, normally that's what we'd like to have is direct access, but this was a high-class company. It was highly respected, which, as Ray pointed out, this high-class entity had to retract one of its key claims of Russian malware inside of Ukraine, and they're working for the Clinton campaign. They're working for Trump's opponent, which was trying to frame Trump simultaneously for colluding with Russia. So this is a scandal, and look, no investigative body has touched this yet, including the House Intelligence Committee. If you read the House Intelligence Committee report that had a lot of really good stuff in it, that was written a few years ago, they focused on a pretty narrow aspect of Russiagate, which is the finding in the intelligence community assessment that Putin had ordered an influence operation to help Trump. And we got so much detail about why that was a scam and how basically the judgment came down to an interpretation of a fragment of a sentence. And it was based on a so-called Kremlin mole who never had direct access to Putin. It was only secondhand information. And in fact, that mole was supposedly was also the source for the idea that Trump had that Putin had ordered the hack and leak. That also was secondhand. So that's interesting. But in terms of the use of CrowdStrike working for Hillary Clinton, there has been so much rightful attention on the fact that the FBI relied on Christopher Steele, who was working for Hillary Clinton. Why has no one applied the same investigative scrutiny to the fact that CrowdStrike which was being used by the FBI, was also being funded by Hillary Clinton? Where is the outrage around that? And that's because, if you look at the two allegations, collusion and Russian interference, collusion is more of a big deal for people in Trump world because that's their guy. There's a partisan interest there in defending him, and he was falsely framed as a Russian asset. So fair enough. But Republicans don't care as much about the Russian hacking allegation because the Russian hacking allegation has been used by some Republicans to justify warmongering. So what did Lindsey Graham and John McCain do when they went to Ukraine in late 2016, early 2017, when they were saying things like 2017 will be the year of offense? They were saying Russia has attacked our democracy by hacking our election, and we're going to go back to Washington. We're going to make sure that they pay a price. So whereas collusion is safe to challenge if you're a Republican, if you're in Washington, the Russian interference allegation is not, because it served a bipartisan goal of raising tensions with Russia. So that's why I suspect it hasn't been challenged as much. And also, there just is this overall deference to the so-called intelligence community, even though, as we've talked about, this was not at all the consensus of the intelligence community that Russia was behind the hack and leak. But we were told that it was. And because there's just so much subservience to the national security state in Washington and in the media, people just don't want to question it. They just don't. Like, they freeze up when you dare challenge the holy word of the intelligence community, even if it's the case, as it was here, that the Obama administration, the Clinton campaign, James Clapper, John Brennan, were not speaking at all for the intelligence community. They were, in fact, suppressing the view of the intelligence community, as expressed by the FBI and the NSA, that they had low confidence in the Russia hack and leak allegation.
There's another element that's very important too. This is just a couple of sentences from the original assessment. It's from the original assessment. This is what they said. This is how absurd it is. A journalist who is a leading expert on the internet research agency, whoever that would be, claimed that some social media accounts that appear to be tied to Russia's professional trolls, because they previously were devoted to supporting Russian actions in Ukraine, started to advocate for President Trump as early as December 20. So they're saying some person who we don't know, probably the Hamilton 68 guys, whatever, said that it appears that some social media accounts, they supported Ukraine, so they must be working for the Kremlin. My point being, they also use this to go after people in the media, to claim that, to do censorship on social media and Twitter and all of that, and started saying, well, if you oppose the Ukraine conflict, then you must be a Kremlin troll, and they would use this stuff for massive censorship.
Yeah, there is such a thing as Trump derangement syndrome. And I've seen it at work among some of my most sophisticated former colleagues at CIA, there is one that took great pride in putting the final touches to that terrible national intelligence estimate of October 1, 2002, which pretty much told Bush, okay, you can go to Congress now and get authorization to launch a war of aggression against Iraq. I call it the whore of Babylon, this estimate. And there was a fellow who put the finishing touches to that and was very proud of it and never really backed up. So I did a great job of putting it in shape, okay? Then later, a couple of years later, when it turned out that the CIA was involved in torture, I had this discussion with them. I said, did you know this? Here's the evidence. Oh my God! Well, I'm gonna write a letter about this, but first I'll check with George Tenet's PR guy. And the next day I get a message back. Oh, well, they're working on that, and it wasn't really what you say, Ray. So I'm not gonna write that letter. Well, the last thing from this particular guy, with whom I worked on the president's daily brief, an excellent writer, pretty smart guy. He says to me, Ray, I'm glad that I've disavowed any association with you, because now I feel more secure. They're not going to come after me when this is just awful what you're doing, and I can't abide it. Now, I don't know. This is real. There's another guy, one of my best friends, who worked for me back in the 70s. He says, "Oh, there's a lot of bull." What Tulsi Gabbard is saying now. So there's a combination of misplaced loyalty to the institution in one respect, but there's also kind of an unwillingness to face up to the fact that Trump could be right about this one little thing, And what my wife always says to me is, Ray, if you're going on this program, okay, don't forget to tell them what you think of Trump. And so I usually do. And what I say is, I think Trump was the worst president the United States ever had. I care about widows, orphans, refugees. That's how I vote, okay? And now that doesn't mean in friends, of course. It doesn't, but anyhow, Trump, he could do something right, and he's trying to do something right on Ukraine. I think at least up until this week. Okay, who knows what it'll be next week? But Putin wants to work with him. That much is clear to me from the things that Putin says and Lavrov says. Okay, well, my God, of course, this president is the only one they have to work with for 3 years. A lot can happen in 3 years, so. I just hope that people can accept the fact that maybe Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde on the Middle East and China and Epstein, but Dr. Jekyll on Ukraine, don't prevent him from doing the kinds of things he needs to get out of there with a defeat that doesn't look like an abject defeat, putting some lipstick on the pig to allow him to say, okay, we worked it out. Vlad and I, good friends, we worked it out. That is promising, or at least was until the last week or so.
Aaron, something I want to ask you, and that is, I am convinced this was a Five Eyes and that MI6 at minimum had a significant part in it. If you look, it started in London. And who the hell is Joseph Mifsud from the very beginning? I keep getting the S and the F. I can never remember if it's Mifsud or Misfood, but whatever. It's like this guy doesn't exist. And to me, what Tulsi Gabbard and Trump could do, if Trump's going to England, is say, Tulsi needs to talk to Joseph, whatever the hell his last name is, number one, and the Scripples. But you're going to need a medium to talk to the Scripples, in my opinion. But your thoughts on this whole, the MI6, and the whole darn Joseph, the Maltese professor, whatever the hell he was, who obviously was some kind of an intelligence construct.
Well, this whole aspect is murky. I know Larry Johnson has alleged that the British intelligence was heavily involved in this, and we do know for sure that UK intelligence was in touch with John Brennan in the summer of 2016 and relaying so-called intelligence to Brennan. For all we know, that could have been the Steele dossier. So they were involved, but to what extent, I don't really know. And as for who Mifsud is, I also don't know. Obviously, he's disappeared. We know that. So that suggests he's not who he says he is. He's not just a professor. The school he was associated with looks like it was some sort of front for something. But the problem there is, his interactions with George Papadopoulos, to me, they weren't necessarily a part of a plot to set up Trump in Russia. It could have been about something else. And then Papadopoulos, when he was questioned by the FBI, he might have embellished for all we know about what he was told. I mean, because all we know is for sure is that it's murky, and then of course the fact that it's really murky. There are a lot of coincidences here. So listen, if someone were to assume that Mifsud was a part of a plot to frame Trump in Russia, I would understand why, because the Australian diplomat who passed on the tip about George Papadopoulos and Mifsud is Alexander Downer, who worked for the Clinton Foundation, right? So another coincidence, but it's what I know is that when James Comey later said that Mifsud was a Russian agent, that was just a bald-faced lie. Mifsud came to Washington, D.C. in early 2017, and the FBI treated him with kid gloves. They interviewed him. If you read the 302, which is like the write-up of the summary of the interview, it's nothing. And this is the guy who supposedly triggered Russiagate by telling a Trump campaign volunteer that the Russians had something on.
Didn't they say they met with him at the State Department?
They met with him in the lobby of his hotel.
Oh, okay.
In Washington. So it's murky. So I would, but I just don't all I know is that the FBI took that predicate and blew it away and completely embellished what it was about. And who was trying to set up who, I don't know. To me, it's not even the biggest question. It's an unanswered question. I'd love to find out why. But whether he was a part of a plot to frame Trump in Russia or some other kind of plot, and then the FBI, seized on whatever Papadopoulos told them or whatever Downer told them, I don't know. I would understand, though, why people think this was part of the plot to frame Trump, because it's shady, it's murky, and Alexander Downer did pass on this tip after having worked for the Clintons, which is just a pretty interesting coincidence.
And we know some of the FBI people said, "Oh, we got in a plane. Was it Strzok and some other people and went to London?" Right.
Yeah. Well, who was?
What's her name? What's her name? Gina Haspel.
Right.
Was in charge of the CIA office in London at the time.
That's correct. That is correct.
She was the chief of station, right?
That's correct. Yeah,
she was correct. There twice, actually. So yeah, you had the right people in the right places to do the wrong things. Yeah. But what's going to come out of all this? Are we going to be silenced again? Is there no way that we can say not only that, look, we were right, but that, hey, well, here's an idea. The head of the Russian Senate, the equivalent of our Senate, made an interview about 5 days ago, and she said, look, gentlemen, or she's a woman, gentlemen, you might want to think about, since you admit that you were wrong about Russiagate, you might want to take steps to right what you did. What she's talking about was 35 Russian diplomats thrown out by Obama on false pretenses, Russian property here in this country confiscated. She said, look, you can make this all right. Just kind of do what one does when one's made this terrible mistake. Now, why I mention that is because Trump is mercurial, right? But he has the option of saying, look, when I was in Helsinki with you, they all made fun of me because they asked me, who do you believe, Russian intelligence or these people in the US? And I said, I don't know. Well, he was right. I can't say. He should have. Now we know he should have said the Russian intelligence, because we have what Russian intelligence was assessing, because they had broken in they'd hacked into these conversations between the Soros people and various and sundry think tanks and so forth. So what we're getting in that appendix is actually compilations of what the Russians reported on the basis of their hacking. This time they did hack into these very easily hackable systems. And they're saying, well, yeah, okay, we know now that it was Julianne Smith that that said that what we do here is associate Trump with Russia, and that's gonna be the key to all this stuff. And she suggested that to Hillary Clinton on the 25th of July 2016, and Hillary said yes on the 26th. All kinds of other things happened on the 26th. So how can we kind of say, well, look, we're not in this to strut around and say we were right. We're in this to make sure this doesn't happen again, and that Tulsi Gabbard has the support she needs. Now, Aaron has done an incredible amount of work, and so have we. It's all out there. It's contemporaneous with when these things happen. Now we have confirmation in these emails and in other things, the Russian assessment. So I'm just betwixt and between. We have to be smarter than we have been in the past. There's got to be a way that we can get the word out so that Americans can realize that they've been had and to be less susceptible to the brainwashing. And that's what it is. I mean, lots of people I talk to, very educated people. Some people in my own family, my God, they still can't reconcile themselves to think that Trump may have been done wrong and that he might be right about this kind of thing. It's Trump derangement syndrome, pure and simple.
Yeah, and the argument I tried to make from the start to people who thought this was a great way to get Trump was that, look, even if you don't care about facts, even if you don't care about the geopolitical consequences, even if you don't care about the intrusion of the national security state into democracy, even if you don't care about helping reinforce the Hillary Clinton campaign's effort to stay relevant after they should have been permanently discredited after losing in 2016, even if you don't care about all that, this was a big gift to Trump, I think, ultimately, because if you're Trump and you want to cut taxes for the ultra wealthy, you want to cut Medicaid, or and all the other bad things I think he did, it's a huge gift if your opposition is focused on a dumb conspiracy theory and counting on Robert Mueller to take care of everything. So I think this was a disaster for anybody who actually is afflicted with Trump derangement system, and is genuinely scared of him. There's a lot of genuine reasons to be afraid of Trump, as Ray believes he's the worst president ever. So even from a partisan point of view, I always thought that this was a disaster. It only served Democratic Party elites like Hillary Clinton, who didn't want to do any honest self-reflection about why they lost to Trump, how Trump took advantage of the very real dysfunctions in this country, the fatigue with war, which he criticized on the campaign trail, disingenuously it turns out, but he tapped into something real, some populist anger. And he talked about being a working class champion, which Democrats refused to do because they abandoned the same people who, a lot of the same people who went and voted for Trump. So even from a partisan point of view, this was a disaster. And that's why it's just never a good idea to go along with these scams. It's just, they're baseless and they have negative consequences and they don't even work. In this case, I mean, like, what has this gotten for Democrats? Like, what did Russiagate get them? It got some good ratings for CNN and MSNBC, better than they would have otherwise got. But otherwise, I can't think of anything else.
Two impeachments.
Yeah. The other thing is, this is, if you care anything about the economics, these are big money laundering operations. An example, there was a bunch of Obama people who got together and started this scam company called New Knowledge. And they went out and they got caught in an Alabama operation in which they created fake Russian bots and then said, "Oh yeah, all of these Russian bots, they're for trying to help Roy Moore." Well, they get caught doing that and they get thrown off Facebook, temporarily, whatever, right? So they get caught doing exactly what they probably did the whole time, was create fake Russian accounts and then say they were on Hamilton 68, whatever. Okay, but here's the problem. After they get caught in an obvious scam with fake Russian accounts, the Senate hires them and pays them this huge amount of money to come up with a Senate report on Russian interference on the Internet Research Agency. So they get caught in an obvious scam and they still get a big pile of basically taxpayer money in their pockets to do another scam on the Internet Research Agency. And I read that and it was garbage.
Yeah, I mean that report was great because they had to acknowledge, buried somewhere in it, that actually these so-called Russian ads that were used to interfere in the election were barely about the election. That like these ads that supposedly swung the election for Trump or helped swing the election for Trump were barely about the election. It was mostly dumb memes, and the reports helpfully put them together. It was just such a joke. And Hillary Clinton Rachel Maddow, when Mueller indicted those employees of the Russian troll farm, she started crying on TV. As if, and
We got 'em!
Gerald Nadler said that this was the equivalent of Pearl Harbor. I mean, it was just absolutely insane. So it was. I love the fact that New Knowledge was actually hired for the Senate, because they had to admit themselves that the Russian bots and trolls they were fear mongering about were barely even talking about the election, and they were just putting out dumb memes that nobody saw. And with that, I'm gonna have to leave you guys. Great to join you both.
All right, thanks a lot,
Keep
Aaron.
up the
Really
good work,
appreciate it.
Aaron. It's really great. As the audience can see, I'm a little bit older than Aaron. I'm not been around a long time here, but it's just an incredible gift for me to see people of Aaron's competence and dedication to the truth. It's nice to know. So thanks, Aaron. And thanks.
And Trump just sent like 2 nuclear submarines. Did you see that? Did you see that story? Trump just sent 2 nuclear subs in the Russian area because he's upset over what Medvedev said. So hopefully some of the work that you 2 guys are doing will help keep us all from getting nuked over this madness.
Well, like last comment, in Trump's first term, on the same day that he pulled out of the INF treaty, a really important arms control treaty negotiated between Gorbachev and Reagan, had eliminated an entire class of offensive weapons that the U.S. and Russia pointed at each other. That was also around the time when the Russian troll farm indictment was in full swing. So you compare the news coverage back then, look at MSNBC. Adam Schiff was going on, and they were talking all about the troll farm being indicted. Maybe a couple words about Trump pulling out of the INF treaty. And that same danger that Russiagate has fueled is now very much in effect now with Trump's announcement about these nuclear submarines. It's just absolute madness. And, the one thing I'm thankful for is at least we're getting some transparency on the scam. And again, I credit both of you for being on this from the start and for not being intimidated by all the people who were smearing critics of Russiagate and sidelining critics of Russiagate and silencing all of us. And, I'm proud to be among the group. So thanks to you both for having, and I'll see you both soon.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right. That's Aaron Matei. That was great. He's done great work. And as I said, this has had real world consequences in that this was used as part of the way to anger, in the same way that Obama took a lot of people that were Democrats who were anti-war and shifted them into the pro-war camp. This was used extensively to create a dynamic where people were both angry at Russia and afraid of Russia. They're evil. They're trying to do things. They're doing all these bad things. Well, of course we have to fight back. And Ukraine must be the good guys. They're not a bunch of goose-stepping, Hitler-tattooed Nazis. No. If they're fighting against these evil Russians who are running Facebook ads to destroy our democracy, they must be good.
I'm aware now, and I just can't stop talking about how much I respect what Aaron is doing. I'm aware now that he won the I.F. Stone Prize. Okay. Now, your audience might not know much about I.F. Stone, but he was an incredible publicist. And one of the things he said stuck with me. He said, look, when you go into this business, you're trying to pursue the truth against all odds. You have to go in with your eyes wide open. You have to realize that you're gonna lose, and then you're gonna lose, and then you're gonna lose again. But then one fine day, and you might be around to see it, someone who thinks like you and believes in justice is gonna win. Okay. Now you have to remember that. And meanwhile, you got to keep your sense of humor, for God's sake, and realize that it's not all up to you, just partially up to you, but do your part, for God's sake. Now, that's what Aaron's doing. That's what you're doing, Garland. And that's what I'm trying to do, so that people listening into this program spread the word. If you're convinced that we're telling it like it is, which I hope you are, I mean the facts bear us out, then spread the word around and have people watch Garland regularly, look at Judge Napolitano and so forth. So we chip away at this and not lose hope, because that once that happens, then the goal goes down the gutter. And meanwhile, the real danger here, as I've already said, is that Americans have been brainwashed, including some of my own family, on Russia. Okay, now, you don't raise it over the Thanksgiving Day table, okay? But you gotta not shy away from it, okay? And you gotta just say, well, look, this is my truth. Have you looked at this? Or why do you dispute this? Here, And by and large, I think we're gonna, well, like I.F. Stone says, eventually, either we or someone who feels like we do, devotion to the truth and justice, are going to win. And I believe that to be the case. So that's what keeps me going. Maybe it will helpful to other people as well.
I'd like to get together again, Ray, next week. 2 names I want to talk about: Seth Rich, Imran A1. I'm convinced that Seth Rich is a big key to this. So I'd like to get with you and talk. Another thing I'm convinced of, I'm convinced of this. Hillary server, that it was a black ops server, that Hillary was up to all kinds of no good and doing all of the CIA and intelligence stuff and all of that kind of stuff. Things that you wouldn't want on a government server. You've running a dirty war in Syria. You're doing some really nasty things. You might not want them on your government server. So perhaps a black ops server might be in order. And when that black ops server, when it's time to, you might have 30,000 emails on that black ops server that you might want to get rid of before you hand it in. And then, of course, if it's a black ops server, the FBI and the intelligence agencies, well, they wouldn't be much about going after you for that, because it was a black ops server and everybody.
Well, here's something from the appendix relating the appendix to the Durham report. Okay. One point is Barack Obama sanctioned the use of all administrative measures to make sure that the FBI investigation of cases related to Clinton and her email correspondence were watched carefully and didn't come to bad conclusions. Next one, quote, based on information from DNC head Wasserman Schultz, the FBI does not possess any kind of direct evidence against Clinton. Now, hear the rest of this. The FBI does not possess any direct evidence against Clinton, because of their timely decision about the email servers. Now, what timely decision could that have been? I mean, it's all right here. So
and what did Imran A1 do again? Oh, that's right. He handled the servers for the DNC, didn't he?
Yeah, and some Congress people as well. Yeah, well, I'm happy to talk about that to the degree I know about it. So thanks.
We'll talk about that, Seth Rich. All right, thanks a lot, Ray. Don't forget, everybody, go to RayMcGovern.com. Follow Ray on X and go to RayMcGovern.com for all of his good work. And of course, Ray, you can also find Ray's stuff on some Consortium News. Consortium News is an outstanding website, and you'll learn a lot of great writers there, a lot of great investigative reporters. So consortiumnews.com is a great place to go. Thanks a lot, Ray, and we'll get together. We need to talk about Seth Rich and Imran A1 and things like that.
You may remember, Garland, that Aaron Rich, Seth's brother, had me subpoenaed. Wanted to know why it was that I said that it wasn't the Russians hacking. They subpoenaed Bill Binney, Ed Loomis, Kurt Wiebe, all of my NSA colleagues. This is back in 2019, okay? Very, very strange. It was my first time being subpoenaed. Actually, the three NSA guys was subpoenaed early in 2019, and I'm saying to myself, what am I, chicken salad? Or and then all of a sudden, this guy comes to my front door shortly after we moved out here in North Carolina, and it was the neighbors were looking. Oh, this guy worked for the CIA. He must have been torturing people or something. Here they got a subpoena slap on him. Anyhow, I've always been wondering why Aaron was doing that, and of course we have Cy Hirsch testifying, that Aaron and his brother actually were in contact with, or trying to sell this information. So that was under oath, and that's a really nasty part of this whole thing. The Rich family got very rich, and they had Democratic monitors. But the notion that they wanted to know why we kept saying that the Russians didn't hack. What evidence do we have for that? Because it had to be the Russians. Because if the Russians didn't hack, if someone with access to the DNC computers put in a thumb drive, which is exactly what the speed with which was copied was, well, who could that have been? Well, there's only one known suspect. And he got murdered on the 10th of July, 2016, okay? 10th of July, it was just a month before that Julian Assange said, we have emails relating to Hillary Clinton pending publication. And they published them 3 days before the Democratic National Convention on the 22nd of July. In the interim, one person who is ostensibly the victim of a robbery from whom the thieves or the robbers took nothing, and then whose computers were seized in the first instance by the Metropolitan Police, but then very quickly, an hour later, in swoops the FBI, swoops up all these computers. The computer that Seth had, private computer, and his company computer, and then never admitted that they had him for several years. So the plot thickens, and someone ought to get to the bottom of this. It's very, very nasty to suggest what I'm suggesting, but when you're an intelligence analyst, you follow the lead, you follow the facts, and sometimes you come to very, very unpalatable conclusions, and this is one of them.
Yeah, and I'm convinced that Imran A wants somewhere in the middle of this. Somewhere in the middle of this. That's none of his stuff makes sense. But anyway, we'll talk later. All right, thanks a lot, Ray. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hey, share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.